Can you talk a little about the fear of being seen? How does it develop? How does it manifest? And if I'm someone struggling with it, how can I stop letting it control my life?
In some shape or form, basically you had some life experience somewhere, whether from childhood through adulthood, that made it unsafe for you to be who you are. And that can look like so many different things, but so often it does start in our homes growing up. To be unsafe being who we are could mean unsafe expressing certain emotions, right? Maybe only certain emotions were allowed in our families, the positive, happy ones. You're not allowed to be angry. You're not allowed to be creative. You're not allowed to be loud, whatever it might be. And if you're punished for those things, shamed for them, retaliated against in some way, like your system learns so quickly that I have to hide who I am, like my authenticity. I have to hide that so that I can keep myself safe. People listening to this might be very familiar with Gabor Mate. He talks so much about this kind of battle between attachment and authenticity. And you know, being seen and authenticity are such important concepts to talk about together, because when you think about what's your authenticity or where it comes from, for me, that's such a visceral experience, and that's connected to your body, it's connected to your emotions and the way that you express yourself. So very often it can start early in life with different types of traumas. I recently posted a reel about how fear of being seen can also be related to sexual trauma. For anyone who's been victimized, where, you know, your body being seen or your personality, and how those things can become paired with harm and risk. So it really spans a lot of different experiences, but certainly not, you know, I want to make a point that it also includes situations or instances where people have been discriminated against for their appearance or their identity, whether it's their gender identity, their cultural identity, religious identity, a number of things, but really any experience, especially when it happens repeatedly. And I think that's the key here. Like, certainly we can have big experiences that are super, super impactful on us, especially when there's harm attached in some way, whether emotional or physical, but even more so when it's a repeated experience. And sometimes those are the harder ones to pinpoint, because they might be, just like as we talk about in complex trauma, they might be sort of like part of the fabric of our everyday lives, where like that's our norm for our parent to respond to that. We don't know any different. But over time, it creates further disconnection from self. And I think that's one of the most detrimental parts of trauma and this kind of wounding, is the further we get away from ourselves, right? When we have to choose safety over being seen and being authentic, is we lose so much. We lose so much of who we really are. We lose our ability to trust ourselves. We lose contact with our goals and our values a lot of times. We give up so much of our power to other people because it's not safe to be within ourselves. So your question about like, how do you start healing this, right? I think first and foremost, always the first place we start is recognizing that this might be something that I resonate with. We can't always pinpoint exactly what experiences we've had that lead us to feel a particular way, but when we can, you know, kind of gently reflect without, you know, gripping tightly to like, I must find the answer. Often we are able to find experiences in our history where it wasn't safe for us to be ourselves in some way, or we had to present a different version of ourselves to be loved, accepted, physically safe, whatever it might be. So when we can at least start to entertain or hold space for some of those experiences, it does over time start to open up a little bit more space for us to look compassionately at that. Because so many of us struggling with this or many other things, it's so easy for us to be judgmental of ourselves, right? Like, especially if you're in those patterns of self-sabotage or not going for the big thing or downplaying something, your achievements, we can be really harsh on ourselves. We can shame ourselves. Why do I keep doing this? What's wrong with me? And this can like feed into beliefs about being defective or not good enough, when really, if we can start to understand that this was at some point your body's brilliant way of keeping you safe, that starts to change our relationship with how we see ourselves over time. So I would say always starting there. And then, for example, what I did in a 2-part masterclass would talk about some of the reasons why this can happen, but then really move into more of this inner child and parts work. Is often if we can start to reflect on where this may have started, we can connect at least with like an age range that we may have been when some of this happened, whether it's early on or later in life. And from there, we might also start to connect with how this fear of being seen is actually a very protective part of us. And we might talk about how that shows up in the nervous system. For some people, this might really map on to what we call the fawn response. So fear of being seen often can have a lot of overlap with fawn response and like people-pleasing behaviors, prioritizing others over yourself. Again, because it's a way to stay small, to stay safe, and make sure, we stay very hyper vigilant to what's happening around us. So we also want to talk about the nervous system. And sometimes, depending on where your nervous system is, that we do need some more support and some tools around that. But at the core of it, we are connecting with our protector parts, right? How this part has protected us, what it's worried would happen if we weren't doing this, right? And this is where we start to hit the edges of some of the trauma. Is if I wasn't staying small, if I was in the spotlight, if I did show this part of myself, if I was vulnerable in this way, we get the story of what we fear will happen. And often that story is like a direct link to experiences or traumas that we've had. And being able to hold some compassionate space for that and hear that and offer validation is really the starting point of being able to work with that fear quite differently and start to transform it. Often with fear of being seen, similar to the fawn response, a big part of that as a way to stay safe is that we often are really skilled at meeting other people's needs and abandoning our own. Right? It's a great way to stay out of the spotlight and make sure everyone around us is appeased and taken care of. So part of that work is also helping you connect back to yourself, right? And I had mentioned that if you have this fear of being seen, if you struggle with being authentic, you don't know who your authentic self is, the starting point for reconnecting back to that is starting in your body, because your feelings are in your body. So if we're to build capacity to, kind of have our own inner compass of what is it that I want to share with the world? What does light me up? What relationship does feel good for me? What doesn't feel good? Where do I need a boundary? All of that starts with us being connected and attuned to our physical bodies. So it's a lot of different pieces that we're having to nurture all at the same time. But on a practical level, what we're also nurturing is, what is it that I wish I could do if this fear wasn't here? Right? What would my life look like? What relationship would I have? What would I be pursuing? How would I be showing up into the world? And sometimes the best way for us to start practicing that is to be surrounded by people, again, even if it's just one person who values your authenticity, who accepts you, who wants to see more of you, whether that's a partner, a friend, a mentor, a community that you're involved in, having a space where you are free to be yourself. It's safe to be you. And the more we practice being our authentic selves, the more confidence we get in doing it. And it's not a confidence that no one will ever reject me, right? That's not what that confidence is. That's not what self-trust is. It's that I will be okay if this happens, because I have this safe adult with me now, companioning my inner child or my younger parts. But also that the outcomes that are likely to happen are typically far less catastrophic than my mind tells me, typically because those catastrophic outcomes come from a younger self who didn't have support, didn't have resources, tools, and the ability to leave or escape whatever the situation is. So on a practical level, every day we're also looking at, where can I take a small step to stretch myself? This isn't about swinging the pendulum from one end to the other. And this is so important if you're doing this work, because our protector parts or your nervous system one and the same. Their primary goal is to keep you safe. So if there's a part of you that's working so incredibly hard to keep you safe, and then you're trying to just completely abandon that protection and swing the other way, everything in your nervous system is going to be sending you alarms and saying, this is too much, this is too much. And it almost is like our nervous system doubles down, our protective parts double down on us, and that works against us. So I would say, think about this in small, tolerable doses, just like we talk about with somatic work. Like, what's one little step? Where can I stretch just a bit more? And that's also like a very skillful way to navigate this in relationships, because not everyone is safe. Not everyone is trustworthy for us to show all of our parts to. So being able to share a little bit and, for example, see how somebody responds. Was that safe? Did that feel like, it was reciprocated? Then I can share a little bit more. So it's through these like small moments that we grow our capacity to show up more fully as ourselves.